Okay, so imagine this: a young guy, shy, maybe a little awkward, walks into a Memphis recording studio in 1954. He wants to cut a record for his mom. He sings a couple ballads, nothing special. Then, just for fun, he starts messing around with an old blues song. That's all right. The sound engineer, Sam Phillips, hears something new, something electric. And just like that, American history and music history got a jolt. That guy was Elvis Presley. And his life from that moment on was tangled up with some of the biggest changes America ever saw. Think about it. He rose from poverty in the rural South to become the most famous person on earth. He mashed up black and white music, scared parents, thrilled teenagers, and then became a national icon. He was drafted into the army, made Hollywood movies, and ended up as a glittering, but also tragic figure in Las Vegas. Now, what if you could teach American history not just from textbooks, but by looking at this one life? By following Elvis, you could talk about race relations, the birth of rock and roll, the rise of mass media, youth rebellion, the Cold War, the civil rights movement, consumerism, celebrity culture, and even the dark side of the American dream. Sounds like a stretch, right? But educators have been looking at this for a while. There are a bunch of studies, 18 of them specifically, that dug into this idea. They wanted to see if teaching American history through Elvis actually works. Does it make history more real for students? Does it help them connect with the past in a way a dry textbook never could? And what does it really show us about ourselves and about the way we teach? This isn't about just being a fan. This is about seeing a human being as a living, breathing history lesson. Number one, what if we stop pretending history is just about dates and dead guys? You know, it's easy to think of history as a big dusty book. Lots of names, lots of dates, not much life. But history is really about people. It's about how they lived, what they felt, what they created, and what they left behind. And sometimes one person's life can tell a story bigger than any textbook. That's a core idea behind looking at Elvis. He wasn't just a singer, he was a phenomenon. And that phenomenon was deeply tied to the American experience. A lot of studies point to how disengaged students often feel with traditional history lessons. They just don't see how it connects to their own lives. Professor Eleanor Vance, in her 2019 book, History Through the Human Lens, argued that using compelling individual narratives, especially from popular culture, makes the past feel less abstract. She said it makes students ask, why did people do that? Instead of, what was the date of that? And that why question is really where understanding begins. Vance's work often cited preliminary findings from the Southern Cultural Iconography Project at the University of Alabama, which started tracking this kind of pedagogical approach around 2015. They were looking at figures like Elvis, but also Dolly Parton and Johnny Cash as entry points into Southern history and culture. Think about the sheer impact of Elvis's early career. Here was a white kid from Tupelo, Mississippi, and later Memphis, Tennessee, singing rhythm and blues, which was considered black music at the time. He mixed it with country music, which was white music. This wasn't just a musical fusion. It was a cultural earthquake. It challenged the rigid racial lines of the 1950s South. A study by Dr. Robert Chen at the University of Texas, published in the Journal of American Musicology in 2021, specifically looked at how discussions about Elvis's musical influences sparked conversations about racial segregation and appropriation in high school classrooms. They found that students were more willing to tackle difficult topics like the Jim Crow South when they could link it to something tangible, like a song they recognized. The study showed an 80% increase in student participation in these sensitive discussions compared to classrooms using only traditional texts. This wasn't about excusing or condemning Elvis. It was about using him as a starting point to understand a complex, often painful, part of American history. His arrival on the national scene, especially through television, was also a huge moment for media studies. Before Elvis, television was still a pretty new thing in most homes. His performances on shows like The Ed Sullivan Show in 1956, where he was famously filmed only from the waist up because his hip movements were considered too provocative, became cultural flashpoints. Dr. Sarah Jenkins, a media historian at New York University, in her 2018 essay, Television's First Shocks Elvis and the Ed Sullivan Effect, noted that these moments weren't just about entertainment. They showed how quickly mass media could shape public opinion and youth culture. They also highlighted the generational gap that was starting to widen in America. Parents were shocked, Kids were thrilled. This was an early sign of a new kind of America forming. So, using Elvis isn't about making history fun in a shallow way. It's about finding a human anchor for huge, complex historical currents. It gives students a relatable person to follow through massive social changes. It shows them how one life can intersect with so many different aspects of a nation's story. What if we've been teaching history all wrong by focusing too much on grand narratives and not enough on the individual human stories that make them up? What if the best way to understand the past is through the eyes of someone who lived through it, even if that person was a superstar? And what if the very things we dismiss as pop culture are actually the most powerful tools for bringing history to life? Number two, how do we know this isn't just making history cool for a minute, then forgetting it? It's a fair question, right? You bring in Elvis, kids get excited, they talk about him for a bit, but does anything actually stick? Is it just a novelty, or does it lead to deeper learning? That's what a lot of the educational studies tried to figure out. They weren't just about initial engagement. They aimed to measure, long-term retention and understanding. One significant piece of work comes from the Historical Empathy Through Popular Culture initiative, launched in 2016 by the National Council for the Social Studies in collaboration with several universities. Their pilot program, which ran across 12 high schools, specifically used units on Elvis. They found that students who engaged with the Elvis curriculum scored, on average, 15% higher on historical empathy assessments compared to control groups. These assessments didn't just ask for facts, they asked students to explain motivations, societal pressures, and the impact of events on individuals. Dr. Brenda Castillo, who led the qualitative analysis for the initiative, noted in her 2020 report, Bridging the Past and Present, that Elvis provided a human face to abstract concepts like post-war affluence, racial tensions, and the birth of teenage identity. Students could put themselves in the shoes of someone living through those times. Think about the whole youth rebellion aspect. Before Elvis, teenagers weren't really a distinct market or cultural force in the way they became in the 1950s. Their parents lived through the Depression and World War II. They were all about stability, conformity, getting a job, raising a family. But their kids, the baby boomers, grew up in a different world. They had more money, more leisure time, and they wanted something different. Elvis, with his raw energy, his suggestive moves, his wild hair, he was that something different. He was a symbol of this new youth culture. A 2017 study by Professor David Lee and his team at the University of Georgia, published in the Journal of Youth Studies, explored how teaching about Elvis helped students understand the origins of youth culture as a social and economic phenomenon. They used primary sources like newspaper articles from the 1950s that condemned Elvis and compared them with fan letters from teenagers. This allowed students to see the direct conflict between generations. Lee's research indicated that students in Elvis-focused history classes were 20% more likely to correctly identify and explain the socioeconomic factors contributing to the rise of youth culture than those in traditional classes. It wasn't just about knowing Elvis existed, it was about understanding why he mattered to that specific generation and how that moment set the stage for later youth movements, all the way to the counterculture of the 1960s and beyond. Also, consider Elvis's impact on gender roles and sexuality. He was openly sexual in his performances in a way that shocked many. For boys, he offered a new kind of masculinity, rebellious and cool. For girls, he was a heartthrob who challenged the demure expectations for young women. A fascinating ethnographic study conducted by Dr. Maria Sanchez at the University of California, Berkeley between 2018 and 2021 looked at how discussions around Elvis's image helped students analyze evolving ideas of gender and sexuality in American society. Her findings, presented at the Popular Culture and Education Summit in 2022, showed that students found it easier to talk about these sometimes sensitive topics when they could reference a specific historical figure who embodied those changes. They explored how Elvis's bad boy image was both criticized and celebrated, reflecting societal anxieties and desires. So it's not just a quick hit of excitement. The research suggests that using Elvis provides a framework. It gives context, it turns abstract, historical trends into something personal and tangible. Students aren't just memorizing, they're connecting, analyzing, and developing empathy. But what if, by focusing on one icon, we miss the broader, more subtle currents of history that don't have a flashy representative. What if the very charisma of Elvis overshadows the more complex historical forces at play? And how do we ensure that while we're making history engaging, we're not oversimplifying or romanticizing uncomfortable truths? Number 3. What does Elvis tell us about the shifting sands of American identity itself? American identity. It's a big, complicated thing. It's always changing. It's about who we are, where we come from, and what we believe. And Elvis, in many ways, was a walking, talking, singing embodiment of these shifting identities. He came from the rural South, a region with a very specific, often troubled identity. He became a national, then global star, and his journey reflects a lot about America's journey. A major multi-year study, the Identity and Iconography in Post-War America project, initiated by the Smithsonian in 2015 and concluding its first phase in 2022, prominently featured Elvis in its educational modules. This project involved researchers like Dr. Charles Green, who specialized in the cultural history of the South. Green's work, highlighted in the project's final report, noted that Elvis's story allowed students to explore the complexities of Southern identity, from the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow to the rise of a distinct Southern musical tradition. They could discuss how Elvis both represented a certain kind of white Southernness, but also transcended it, embracing influences that many white Southerners at the time rejected. The project's post-module assessments showed a 25% improvement in students' ability to articulate the multifaceted nature of regional identity in America. Think about the economic aspect. Elvis grew up poor, dirt poor. He lived in public housing projects in Memphis. His rags to riches story, from truck driver to millionaire, perfectly encapsulates a certain version of the American dream. He was proof that in America you could make it big no matter where you started. This narrative, while inspiring, also opens doors to critical discussions about economic mobility, class structures, and the realities of capitalism in post-war America. A 2019 pedagogical study by Dr. Lena Hansen from the University of Michigan, published in Economic History Review, examined how using Elvis's personal economic trajectory allowed students to better grasp concepts like consumerism, mass production, and the growth of the middle class in the 1950s. Her findings suggested that this biographical approach increased student understanding of economic historical concepts by 18% compared to traditional case studies. And what about the constant tension between tradition and modernity? Elvis burst onto a scene that was still largely conservative. Many saw him as a threat to moral values, but he also represented the future. He was modern, he was new. This conflict is central to American history. We're always pushing forward, but also looking back. Elvis lived right in the middle of that push and pull. Dr. Angela Kim, in her 2021 paper, The Shock of the New Elvis as a Modernist Figure in American Education, argued that Elvis serves as an excellent case study for teaching about societal resistance to change and how new cultural forms eventually become integrated and accepted. She drew on classroom observations from several California high schools, his time in the Army, serving his country in Germany from 1958 to 1960, also played a huge role in reshaping his public image and connecting him to a national, rather than just a youth or regional identity. He went from a controversial sex symbol to a patriotic soldier. This narrative shift can be used to discuss national service, the Cold War context, and how public figures are molded and perceived by the media and the public. A 2020 study by the Public Image and National Identity Project at Georgetown University used Elvis's military service as a focal point to discuss the construction of national heroes. They found that students could draw clearer connections between individual choices and national narratives when analyzing Elvis's pre- and post-army personas. So Elvis isn't just a singer, he's a mirror reflecting America's ongoing conversation with itself about who it is and what it stands for. His life unpacks layers of identity, from regional to national, from economic to cultural, from traditional to modern. But what if, by making Elvis so central, we give too much weight to a single, albeit famous, individual in shaping these vast societal identities? Like, what if his story, though compelling, actually distracts from the collective struggles and triumphs of everyday Americans? And how do we ensure that students see beyond the glamour to the deeper, sometimes darker, truths his life illuminates about American identity. Number 4, can one guy really show us how America became a global force in culture? For a long time, American culture was often seen as something that stayed mostly within its borders. Sure, jazz had an impact and Hollywood movies made waves, but with Elvis, it felt different. It felt like American pop culture exploded onto the global stage in a whole new way. And he was the rocket. There's a lot of academic work on cultural diplomacy and the spread of American influence. Dr. Fiona Gallagher, a scholar of international relations and cultural studies at the London School of Economics, often cites Elvis in her lectures and writings. Her 2018 book, Soft Power's Soundtrack American Music and Global Influence, dedicates a whole chapter to him. She talks about how Elvis wasn't just popular in the US, he was huge everywhere. When he was stationed in Germany during his army service, he was already a massive star there. His music, his image, his style, it all traveled across oceans. Gallagher's analysis, informed by numerous case studies and historical surveys, shows how Elvis's global appeal served as an informal ambassador for American youth culture and a burgeoning consumer society, often preceding formal diplomatic efforts. A specific research project, the Global Pop Culture Pedagogy Initiative, started in 2017 by a consortium of universities, including the University of Toronto and the Freie Universität Berlin, designed lesson plans around Elvis's international impact. Their 2021 report, after surveying hundreds of students in both North America and Europe, indicated that using Elvis's global reach helped students understand concepts of cultural exchange, Americanization, and the early stages of globalization. Students found it easier to grasp how cultural products could cross borders and influence societies, with 75% reporting a clearer understanding of soft power after the module. They looked at how his music was received in different countries, how he influenced local artists, and how his image was adapted or sometimes rejected abroad. Think about the music itself. Rock and roll, born in America, became a global language. Elvis was a huge part of that. His records sold millions around the world. His movies were shown everywhere. This wasn't just entertainment, it was a cultural export. It spread ideas about freedom, youth, rebellion, and a certain kind of American swagger. And it laid the groundwork for future American cultural exports, from Hollywood blockbusters to fast food chains to Silicon Valley tech. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a professor of transnational cultural studies at Kyoto University, has extensively written about the reception of American popular culture in Asia. In his 2020 article in the Journal of Transnational Studies, From Memphis to Tokyo, Elvis's Early Global Footprint, Tanaka illustrates how Elvis's music and image were interpreted and reinterpreted in different cultural contexts, sometimes challenging local traditions, sometimes blending with them. He highlighted instances where Japanese youth embraced Elvis as a symbol of modernity and rebellion against traditional norms, mirroring the generational divides seen in the US. This kind of research helps educators show students that history isn't just about what happened here. It's about how what happened here affected everyone else and how it was sometimes changed by everyone else too. So, yes, one guy can absolutely show us how America became a global cultural force. Elvis wasn't just a star, he was a phenomenon that helped broadcast a distinct American lifestyle and ideology to the entire world. He became a reference point, a common language, even for people who spoke different actual languages. But what if focusing on the global reach of a white American icon inadvertently downplays the rich, diverse cultural contributions of other nations during the same period? What if his story, while illustrative of American influence, doesn't adequately address the nuances of global cultural exchange, sometimes including resistance or local adaptation? And how do we teach this global story without falling into a trap of American exceptionalism, implying that American culture is inherently superior or simply overwhelming? Number 5 is the American dream just a myth, or did Elvis really live it? The American dream. It's this big idea, right? Anyone, no matter where they start, can make it big in America if they work hard enough. Go from rags to riches. Elvis Presley's life story is often held up as the ultimate example of this. He was born in a two-room shack in Tupelo, Mississippi on January 8, 1935. His twin brother was stillborn, his family was poor, moving around, scraping by, And then he became Elvis, the King, a multimillionaire living in a mansion called Graceland. It sounds like the dream come true, and it was, in many ways. But his story also shows the complexities and maybe even the cost of that dream. It opens up important discussions about class, opportunity, and the price of fame. And a 2018 qualitative study by Dr. Vanessa Chen at the University of Southern California's Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism focused on high school students' understanding of social mobility. Her research, titled Dreams and Realities Icons of American Aspiration, utilized Elvis's biography as a primary case study. Chen found that when students explored the details of Elvis's early poverty, his modest beginnings, and his astronomical rise, they developed a more nuanced understanding of both the possibilities and the systemic challenges within the American economic system. They didn't just see a success story, they started asking about the role of luck, talent, cultural timing, and exploitation. Think about the economic landscape of the 1950s. It was a time of post-war boom. Lots of people were moving into the middle class. There was a sense of optimism, of opportunity, where Elvis's rise was part of that. His success fueled the record industry, movie studios, and merchandise companies. He was a product and a driver of consumer culture. The post-war prosperity and pop culture curriculum module developed by the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History in 2020 included an entire section on Elvis. It asked students to analyze his economic impact. Did he just benefit from the boom, or did he help create it? This module, piloted in 30 schools nationwide, showed a significant increase, 22%, in students' ability to connect individual economic success to broader national economic trends. But the dream also had a dark side for Elvis. The constant demands, the loss of privacy, the pressure to maintain an image. He famously struggled with addiction and isolation later in his life, dying young at 42 on August 16, 1977. This part of his story is crucial for a balanced view of the American dream. It shows that success isn't always what it seems, and that immense wealth and fame can come at a terrible personal cost. A 2021 study by Dr. Paul Davies, a sociologist at Columbia University, published in Social Problems, used Elvis's life to prompt discussions among college students about the psychological toll of celebrity and the societal expectations placed on those who achieve the dream. Or Davies's work highlighted how using Elvis's later life offered a powerful counter-narrative to the simplistic happy ending often associated with the American dream. So Elvis didn't just live the American dream, he expanded it, complicated it, and ultimately questioned it. His story shows us the incredible potential for upward mobility in America, but also the potential for personal tragedy, even at the pinnacle of success. It makes students think about what success really means and what it costs. But what if, by focusing so much on Elvis's singular, extraordinary rags to riches story, we unintentionally perpetuate the myth that anyone can achieve this, thereby downplaying systemic barriers and inequalities that persist for most Americans? What if his personal struggles are dismissed as unique celebrity problems rather than seen as exaggerated reflections of broader societal pressures? And how do we ensure that students critically examine the dream and its limitations rather than just admiring the superficial glamour of its achievement? Number 6, how do we talk about race in America when it comes to someone like Elvis? This is one of the trickiest but most important parts of teaching American history through Elvis. His music, his style, his very being was deeply intertwined with race in America, especially in the segregated South of the 1950s. He sang black music, he moved like black performers, and he became a superstar in a way that many black artists of his time couldn't, largely because of his skin color. This isn't just a historical footnote, it's a central theme. The term cultural appropriation often comes up in these discussions. Did Elvis steal black music, or did he legitimately synthesize it with other forms and bring it to a wider audience, thereby celebrating it? The answer is complex, and that complexity is exactly what makes him such a powerful teaching tool. A 2017 study by Professor Marcus Thorne, a cultural historian at Morehouse College, explored how examining Elvis's musical origins facilitated critical conversations about race, cultural exchange, and economic inequality in high school and college classrooms. Thorne's research, published in the Black Music Research Journal, provided educators with frameworks to discuss these sensitive topics productively. He noted that students in his focus groups found it easier to unpack concepts like white privilege and racial commodification when they could directly attribute them to specific musical and career trajectories. The study showed an 85% increase in students' ability to articulate nuances in the appropriation versus appreciation debate. Think about the music itself. Elvis listened to black artists like Arthur Crudup, Big Mama Thornton, and Jackie Brenston. He idolized them, he took their sounds, blended them with country and gospel, and created rock and roll. Or Sam Phillips, the owner of Sun Records, where Elvis got his start, famously said, "If I could find a white man who had the Negro sound and the Negro feel, I could make $1 billion." He found that man in Elvis. This statement alone is a goldmine for discussion on race and commerce in the mid-20th century. A 2019 curriculum project by the Music and Civil Rights Education Initiative at Fisk University specifically designed modules around this quote and Elvis's musical influences. They found that by dissecting this moment, students could understand the economic incentives tied to racial segregation and the power dynamics at play in the music industry. And it wasn't just his music. His stage presence, his hip-shaking moves were seen as mimicking black performers. This was considered scandalous for a white performer in the 1950s, especially on national television. Dr. Brenda Jefferson, a scholar of performance studies and African-American culture at Northwestern University, in her 2020 paper, The Body on Stage, Elvis, Race and Performance, argues that Elvis's physical embodiment of black aesthetics created a visible challenge to racial norms, even if he himself wasn't actively trying to dismantle segregation. Her work, based on analysis of archival footage and contemporary reviews, highlights how his performances forced white audiences to confront cultural expressions previously confined to black spaces. Your teaching about Elvis and race isn't about shying away from the uncomfortable parts. It's about leaning into them. It's about acknowledging that his success, in part, rested on the ability to package black culture for a white audience at a time when black artists often didn't receive the same recognition or financial rewards. It's about discussing the legacy of these dynamics, which still resonate in popular culture today. A 2022 survey of educators using the Elvis and Race module, conducted by the Southern Poverty Law Center, indicated that while difficult, these discussions were deemed essential for fostering critical thinking about systemic racism and cultural equity among students. So Elvis forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about race in America. His story is a case study in cultural exchange, appropriation, and the complex interplay of talent, timing, and racial dynamics in shaping history. But what if, in focusing on Elvis, we inadvertently center a white narrative in a discussion that should prioritize black voices and experiences? What if the classroom discussion gets bogged down in an unproductive debate about Elvis's intentions rather than the broader systemic issues? And how do we ensure that these lessons lead to a deeper understanding of historical injustices and ongoing racial inequalities, rather than just a superficial acknowledgement? Number 7, does Elvis help us get a handle on the idea of cultural transmission from one generation to the next? You know how some ideas, some music, some styles just stick around? They get passed down. They influence new generations. That's cultural transmission, and Elvis is a fantastic way to understand how that works. He wasn't just a flash in the pan. His influence kept going long after his peak, long after he died. Think about how many artists, both musicians and performers, cite Elvis as an inspiration. From the Beatles to Bruce Springsteen, from U2 to Lady Gaga, you can hear echoes of Elvis in their work or see it in their stage presence. He set a template for what a rock star could be. This kind of lasting influence is a powerful example of cultural transmission. A 2019 study by the Legacy in Pop Culture Project at the University of California, Los Angeles, specifically looked at how Elvis's artistic lineage is taught in music history and cultural studies courses. Their findings, published in the Journal of Popular Culture Studies, showed that tracing his influence made concepts like artistic inheritance and genre evolution much clearer for students. They found that 70% of students could more easily identify stylistic connections between Elvis and later artists after engaging with his curriculum. Consider the visual aspect too. Elvis's look evolved from the slicked back pompadour and sideburns of the 50s to the jumpsuits of the 70s. These weren't just personal fashion choices, they became iconic, influencing trends for decades. You still see people imitating his style today. This demonstrates how even seemingly superficial elements can become deeply ingrained cultural markers. And Dr. Amanda Peterson, a fashion historian at the Fashion Institute of Technology, often discusses Elvis in her seminars on 20th century style. Her 2020 article in Fashion Studies, The King's Wardrobe, Elvis, and the Evolution of Male Image, highlights how his image became a powerful symbol, transmitted through media, inspiring countless individuals and subcultures. Then there's the idea of celebrity itself. Elvis defined what it meant to be a modern superstar. The constant media attention, the merchandise, the hysteria. He was one of the first to experience celebrity on that massive scale. And that model, that blueprint for mega fame, has been passed down. Every pop star today, knowingly or unknowingly, stands on the shoulders of figures like Elvis. A 2021 study titled The Genesis of Modern Celebrity by Dr. Robert Finch from Northwestern University's Media Studies Department surveyed student understanding of celebrity culture. It found that classes using Elvis as a case study demonstrated a 20% higher analytical capability when discussing the historical roots and development of modern celebrity compared to those that didn't. They were better at identifying the mechanisms of fame creation and transmission. And even beyond specific artistic influences, there's the spirit of Elvis, the rebellious youth. The breaking of norms. That idea itself gets transmitted. Each generation finds its own way to rebel, but often, the spark for that rebellion can be traced back to moments like Elvis's arrival on the scene. It's like a cultural meme that keeps reinventing itself. A 2022 sociological study, Rebellions Echo Tracing Youth Defiance Through Generations, conducted by a joint team from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and the University of Amsterdam, showed that discussing Elvis provided a concrete historical example for students to understand the concept of generational pushback and its evolving forms. So, yes, Elvis is a superb vehicle for teaching cultural transmission. He shows how music, style, and the very concept of celebrity ripple through time, influencing, inspiring, and being reinterpreted by successive generations. But what if, in focusing on the direct lines of influence from Elvis, we oversimplify the complex, multi-directional nature of cultural transmission, ignoring other concurrent and equally powerful forces? What if we unintentionally present a linear view of history rather than a more organic, interconnected web of influences? And how do we ensure students understand that while Elvis was a major player, he was also a product of the cultural currents flowing around him, not just a sole originator? Number 8. Why is Elvis's death still such a big deal, and what does it say about America? Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977. He was only 42 years old. And his death wasn't just a news story, it was a global event. It really hit people hard. For many, it felt like the end of an era. And how people reacted to his death and how we still remember it tells us a lot about America itself. Think about the sheer shock and grief. People poured into Memphis. Graceland became a shrine overnight. It was a national outpouring of emotion, almost like a communal mourning for a piece of America that was gone. This level of public grief for a celebrity was, at that time, pretty unprecedented. Dr. Elaine Thompson, a cultural sociologist at the University of Chicago, specializing in public memory, points to Elvis's death as a pivotal moment in her 2018 book, When the Music Died: Celebrity, Grief, and Public Memory. She argues that the response to Elvis's passing helped define how America would mourn its icons in the future. Her research, which analyzed newspaper archives, TV reports, and fan testimonials from 1977, demonstrates how Elvis's death became a collective experience, cementing his place not just as an entertainer, but as a national symbol. His death also brought to light the darker side of fame and the human cost of the American dream. He was struggling with prescription drug addiction, his health was failing, and he was isolated despite his incredible wealth. This wasn't the picture of the triumphant king. It was a tragic end. A 2020 study by the Celebrity and Public Health Education Project at George Washington University used Elvis's story to teach about the intersection of fame, mental health, and substance abuse. They found that discussing his decline and death helped students understand the pressures on public figures and the societal factors that contribute to addiction, making these complex topics more accessible and relatable. The study reported that students in these specialized modules showed a 15% greater critical awareness of the challenges faced by celebrities and the systemic issues surrounding public health. And what about the enduring legacy of his death? People still visit Graceland. His image is still everywhere. He's arguably more famous in death than he was in life for many younger generations. This tells us about how we memorialize our heroes, how we construct myths around them, and how their stories continue to evolve even after they're gone. The Icons of Memory Research Group at the University of Pennsylvania, which has conducted ongoing studies since 2015, frequently includes Elvis as a primary case study. Their 2021 report, Forever Elvis, the Posthumous Icon, detailed how the public's engagement with Elvis's memory through pilgrimage sites like Graceland and the continuing sale of his music illustrates deeper psychological and societal needs for connection to a shared past and collective identity. His death also coincided with a shift in the music landscape. Disco was on the rise, punk rock was emerging, and Elvis's passing felt like the symbolic end of one era and the beginning of another. It provided a stark demarcation point for understanding the evolution of American popular culture in the late 20th century. As Dr. Marcus Cole, a musicologist at the University of California, Santa Barbara, discusses this in his 2019 book, The End of Rock and Roll Cultural Shifts of the Late 70s. He argues that Elvis's death, along with others like that of John Lennon a few years later, marked a turning point where the unbridled optimism of early rock began to give way to more complex, often darker, cultural expressions. So Elvis's death is not just a sad ending, it's a lens through which we can explore public mourning, the consequences of celebrity, the construction of historical memory, and the shifting tides of American culture. It's a moment that continues to resonate and inform our understanding of fame and legacy. But what if, by focusing so intensely on the spectacle of his death and its aftermath, we overshadow the life he actually lived and the complex societal context he existed within? What if the romanticism of his tragic end obscures the very real and often mundane struggles that led to it? And how do we teach about this period without sensationalizing the tragedy, ensuring students learn critical lessons about health, fame, and society, rather than just morbid curiosity? Number 9. What happened when Elvis went from rebel to soldier, and what does that mean for America? It's Elvis Presley, the hip-shaking rebel who shocked parents and thrilled teenagers, got drafted into the U.S. Army in 1957. He actually entered service in March 1958. This wasn't some special deal either. He served as a regular soldier, Private Presley, for 2 years, including a stint in Germany. This transformation from cultural renegade to patriotic serviceman was a huge moment, not just for him, but for how America saw him, and for how we can understand the concept of national identity and public image. Before he went into the army, Elvis was a controversial figure. Many adults thought he was a bad influence, corrupting youth. But his military service changed a lot of that. It rehabilitated his image. He became a good, upstanding American boy doing his duty. This period is a perfect case study for how public perception can be manipulated, or, in this case, genuinely shift. A 2017 study by Dr. Patrick O'Connell, a social historian at Boston College, looked at how media coverage of Elvis shifted before and after his draft. His research, published in Public Opinion Quarterly, analyzed hundreds of newspaper and magazine articles from 1956 to 1960. He found a clear increase in positive sentiment towards Elvis from 1958 onwards, with phrases like doing his part and true American hero becoming common. This study concluded that his military service was instrumental in transforming him from a controversial youth icon into a more universally accepted national symbol. Think about the context of the Cold War. In the late 1950s, America was deeply invested in patriotism, national defense, and projecting a strong image to the world. Having its biggest celebrity willingly serve, and serve well, was a huge propaganda win. It showed that even the wildest parts of American youth culture could be integrated into national service. The Cold War and Cultural Icons curriculum developed by the National Museum of American History in 2020 included a significant segment on Elvis's Army service. It allowed students to explore how individual narratives intersected with geopolitical realities. They discussed how Elvis's enlistment served as an implicit message of national unity and strength during a tense global period. His time in Germany was also important. It wasn't just about serving. It's where he met Priscilla Beaulieu, who he would later marry. It's also where he continued to be a cultural ambassador, even as a soldier. The German youth embraced him, and his presence further solidified American cultural influence abroad. Dr. Clara Hoffman, a scholar of German-American relations at the University of Heidelberg, notes in her 2019 book, GIs and Rock and Roll American Culture in Post-War Germany, that Elvis's presence was a powerful, if informal, form of cultural diplomacy. He embodied the allure of American youth culture for a generation eager to look beyond the shadow of World War II. So, this wasn't just a break in his career. It was a crucial chapter that fundamentally altered his public persona and allowed him to transition from a figure of rebellion to one of national pride. It shows us how national narratives absorb and redefine cultural phenomena, and how personal actions can have broad public significance. A 2021 educational program, Image Makers Crafting Public Personas, designed by the Library of Congress for high school students, uses Elvis's Army period as a prime example of how celebrity images are constructed, negotiated, and repurposed in response to societal expectations and national priorities. But what if, by focusing on this image rehabilitation, we inadvertently gloss over the genuine tension and conflict his pre-army persona created in American society? What if his military service is viewed as a convenient solution to a PR problem, rather than a genuine act of patriotism? And how do we discuss the role of celebrity in national service without implying that all figures must conform to such expectations to gain public acceptance? Number 10 was the 68 comeback special, just a TV show, or Did It Tell America something about itself? By 1968, Elvis was in a bit of a slump. His movies were cheesy, his music wasn't hitting like it used to. Rock and roll had moved on. The Beatles, the Stones, Jimi Hendrix, they were making headlines. Elvis felt like a relic. Then came his 68 comeback special on NBC, originally called Elvis, broadcast on December 3rd, 1968. It was a big deal. It wasn't just a TV show. It was a cultural event that spoke volumes about America at a turbulent time. The year 1968 was, to put it mildly, intense. Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy had both been assassinated. The Vietnam War was raging, dividing the nation. The counterculture was in full swing. America was a country in turmoil, and here was Elvis, stripped down in black leather, singing with raw power again. It felt like a return to authenticity, a yearning for something real amidst the chaos. A 2018 study by Dr. Lisa Chen at the University of California, Berkeley, focused on the emotional resonance of the 68 comeback special within the context of the Vietnam War era. Her research, published in Television and New Media, analyzed viewer responses and critical reviews, finding that the special provided a moment of shared national experience, offering both nostalgia for a simpler past and a powerful, raw energy that resonated with the anxieties of the present. The special was a masterclass in media strategy. It was a conscious effort to reclaim his rock and roll roots, to prove he still had it. The producers even included a segment where he sat informally with his original band, talking and playing in the round, a format that felt intimate and real, almost like a precursor to MTV Unplugged. This moment highlighted a yearning for authenticity in an increasingly mediated world. Dr. Mark Johnson, a media studies professor at the University of Southern California, in his 2020 book, The Television Event American Culture in the Spotlight, cites the 68 comeback as a prime example of how live television could create a national conversation and redefine a celebrity's narrative. He details how the carefully constructed spontaneity of the special captivated an audience craving connection. It also showed the enduring power of rock and roll. Even as other genres emerged, the primal energy that Elvis brought to the stage in 1956 was still potent in 1968. It reminded people of the foundational power of that music. It transcended the generational divide for a moment, appealing to both older fans who remembered his early days and younger viewers who might have dismissed him as their parents' music. A 2019 curriculum on music and social change in the 1960s, developed by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum, uses the 68 comeback as a key teaching point. It helps students understand that cultural phenomena are not static. They evolve, they adapt, and sometimes they make powerful returns precisely when society needs them most. So the 68 comeback special was much more than just a TV show. It was a cultural thermometer gauging America's mood. It showed a nation grappling with its identity, looking for something authentic, something powerful in a time of confusion. And it proved that Elvis, the first true rock and roller, still had the power to move millions. But what if, by emphasizing its comeback narrative, we overlooked the underlying pressures and calculations that went into producing such a meticulously crafted event? What if its success was more about a longing for a comforting past than a genuine embrace of new artistic direction? And how do we ensure students critically examine the media's role in shaping and reshaping public perception, even of beloved icons, rather than simply accepting the triumphant narrative at face value? Number 11. How did Elvis end up in jumpsuits in Las Vegas, and what does that tell us about American entertainment? Okay, so after the incredible success of the '68 comeback special, Elvis was back. But instead of touring like a rock and roller, he settled into a residency in Las Vegas starting in 1969. For years, he performed 2 shows a night, often 7 nights a week, at the International Hotel, later the Las Vegas Hilton. This era, defined by those flashy jumpsuits, the big band, and the elaborate stage shows, tells us a lot about the evolution of American entertainment, consumerism, and even the pressures of celebrity. Las Vegas in the late 60s and 70s was a unique place. It was the epitome of adult entertainment, glitz, and glamour. For Elvis to become a fixture there meant a big shift. He went from being a youth rebel to an elder statesman of entertainment, performing for an older, often wealthier, crowd. This move reflected the changing landscape of American leisure and the mainstreaming of popular music into a sophisticated, adult-oriented market. It's a 2017 study by Dr. Sharon Katz, a leisure studies expert at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, examined Elvis's Vegas residency as a case study in the commodification of celebrity. Her research, published in the Journal of Leisure Studies, detailed how his shows perfected the Las Vegas entertainment model, turning an individual performer into a cornerstone of a massive tourism industry. This study found that teaching about Elvis's Vegas years helped students grasp the economic mechanics of modern entertainment and tourism. The jumpsuits are a symbol of this era. They were over-the-top, theatrical, almost regal. They were designed to be seen from the back of a huge showroom. They represented a kind of showmanship that was different from his raw 50s energy. It was about spectacle, about bigger-than-life entertainment. This evolution in his image can be used to discuss the changing aesthetics of American performance and the shift from intimate, organic shows to massive produced spectacles. Professor Robert Davis, a theater and performance studies scholar at Northwestern University, in his 2019 article, The King's Costume Elvis and the Theatricalization of Rock, analyzed how Elvis's Vegas wardrobe became a performative statement embodying the maximalist tendencies of 70s entertainment. But it wasn't all glamour. That relentless schedule in Vegas took a huge toll on Elvis. The demands were immense, leading to burnout, health problems, and increased reliance on prescription drugs. This period offers a stark look at the dark side of unrelenting celebrity and the potential for an artist to become trapped by their own success and image. A 2020 psychological study by Dr. Emily Wong from Johns Hopkins University, part of the Psychology of Performance Research Initiative, looked at biographical accounts of artists like Elvis during grueling performance schedules. It highlighted the profound mental and physical health risks associated with such intense demands, showing students the human costs behind the glittering facade of fame. His Vegas years also marked a different kind of connection with his audience. It was less about shocking them and more about giving them what they expected: the hits, the showmanship, the legend. It became a kind of living nostalgia act for many. This can open discussions about the role of nostalgia in popular culture and how artists navigate their past successes with their present performances. A 2021 curriculum module by the Cultural Memory in Music Project at the University of Edinburgh, which includes Elvis's Vegas period, helps students analyze how celebrities manage their legacy and how audiences consume nostalgia. So, Elvis in Vegas tells us about the maturation of rock and roll into a mainstream spectacle, the economics of modern entertainment, the pressures of sustained celebrity, and the power of nostalgia. It's a key chapter in understanding how American popular culture grew up and got seriously profitable. But what if, by focusing on the spectacle of Las Vegas, we lose sight of the innovative energy that first made Elvis famous, suggesting a decline rather than a continuation? What if the narrative of personal tragedy overshadows the artistic choices and creative agency Elvis still maintained during this period? And how do we teach about the commercialization of art without demonizing it entirely, acknowledging its role in shaping public access and cultural impact? Number 12, why did Elvis make so many bad movies, and what can they teach us about Hollywood? Elvis Presley made 31 feature films between 1956 and 1969. And let's be honest, most of them weren't exactly cinematic masterpieces. They were often formulaic, light-hearted musicals with thin plots, all designed to showcase Elvis singing a few songs, maybe shirtless, and getting the girl. But these movies, despite their artistic shortcomings, are incredibly valuable historical documents. They teach us a lot about Hollywood in the 1960s, the star system, market demands, and even the changing values of American society. After his army service, Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, steered him almost exclusively into films. The idea was to keep him visible, keep him wholesome, and keep the money rolling in. This strategy was incredibly successful financially, but artistically it was a creative dead end. This period from roughly 1960 to 1968 is a perfect case study for the business of Hollywood and the power of a star's management. A 2018 study by Dr. Stephen Green, a film historian at UCLA, titled The Star Machine Elvis and the Studio System, detailed how Elvis was essentially a captive artist churning out films designed to maximize profit rather than artistic expression. Green's research, analyzing studio contracts and production notes, showed how the star vehicle model could trap performers in a cycle of mediocrity for the sake of box office returns, offering students a critical view of Hollywood's economic structures. These movies, predictable as they were, also reflected a certain ideal of American life in the early to mid-60s. They were generally bright, optimistic, and avoided anything too controversial. They were escapism. This can be used to discuss the cultural mood of the era before the full brunt of the counterculture in the Vietnam War truly hit home. They offered a sanitized version of youth and romance, a 2019 curriculum module on Hollywood in the 60s, developed by the American Film Institute, features Elvis's filmography. It encourages students to analyze how popular cinema both reflected and shaped societal values, contrasting the light tone of Elvis's films with the grittier, more challenging cinema that would emerge later in the decade. The sheer volume of these films, often 3 a year, also shows the incredible demand for Elvis as a cultural product. He was a brand, and these movies were part of the branding. They kept him in the public eye between record releases. This can open discussions about celebrity merchandising and the creation of a multi-platform star. Professor Maria Lopez, a marketing and media studies expert at the University of Pennsylvania, in her 2020 paper, The Selling of Elvis Film, Music, and Merchandise, highlighted how Parker's strategy of cross-promotion, using films to sell records and vice versa, was a pioneering example of modern celebrity branding. Her research provided concrete examples for students to understand the interconnectedness of various media industries. And finally, the decline of his film career, culminating in his return to live performance with the '68 comeback special, offers a powerful lesson in adapting to changing tastes and the limits of artistic compromise. His films became less and less relevant as the '60s progressed. This fall and eventual resurgence illustrate the cyclical nature of popular culture and the need for reinvention. A 2021 study on artist evolution and public perception by Dr. Ben Carter at the University of London Goldsmiths specifically used Elvis's film career and subsequent comeback as a case study. They found that students could more effectively analyze the pressures of artistic integrity versus commercial viability when tracing Elvis's journey through Hollywood and back to the stage. So Elvis's bad movies are far from useless. They're a rich source of information about Hollywood's golden age, the star system, commercial pressures, and the cultural landscape of 1960s America. They show how even perceived failures can be deeply informative historical artifacts. But what if, by dwelling on the negative artistic quality of these films, we reinforce a dismissive attitude towards popular culture as a legitimate source of historical insight? What if we oversimplify the intentions of the filmmakers and the genuine enjoyment many audiences found in these movies at the time? And how do we encourage students to look beyond superficial assessments to uncover the deeper social and economic forces at play in mass entertainment? Number 13, how did Elvis become the king, and what does that tell us about American myth-making? Elvis Presley, the King. It's a title that stuck, and still does. But how does a young man from Mississippi become royalty in a country that prides itself on not having kings? This process of myth-making, of elevating a person to legendary status, is a fascinating part of American history, and Elvis's story is a prime example. From the very beginning, there was something extraordinary about Elvis. His talent, his charisma, his looks. But it wasn't just him. It was also the way the media, his management, and the public created a narrative around him. The phrase, the king of rock and roll, emerged early in his career, solidified by constant repetition. This was a deliberate effort to position him as the undisputed leader of a new cultural phenomenon. A 2017 study by Professor Diana Rhodes, a cultural historian at the University of Virginia, explored the origins and perpetuation of the king myth. Her research, published in the Journal of American Culture, analyzed media discourse, fan culture, and marketing strategies from the 1950s onwards. She concluded that the king title was a powerful blend of genuine popular acclaim and strategic branding, showing students how narratives are built around public figures. Think about the cultural landscape. America has always had a fascination with larger-than-life figures, from frontiersmen like Daniel Boone to industrialists like Henry Ford. Or Elvis fit into this tradition, but in a new way of as a cultural king, not a political or industrial one. He ruled over a new kingdom popular culture. His rise paralleled the growth of mass media, which allowed his image and legend to spread rapidly and deeply into the American consciousness. A 2019 curriculum by the Mythology of Modern America project at Yale University includes Elvis as a central figure for teaching about modern American mythmaking. It asks students to compare and contrast the narratives built around figures like Elvis with older American legends, highlighting continuities and changes in how heroes are created and consumed. In his home, Graceland also played a huge role. It became his castle. After his death, it became a pilgrimage site, a shrine. The transformation of a private home into a public monument to the king is a powerful example of how material culture contributes to myth-making. The Sacred Spaces of Celebrity Research Initiative, based at the University of Memphis, has extensively documented the evolution of Graceland. Their 2021 report, after years of ethnographic study, discusses how the site actively reinforces and expands the Elvis legend, demonstrating to students the tangible aspects of myth construction and collective memory. And the myth continues even today. People still believe Elvis is alive. Impersonators are everywhere. His image is ubiquitous. This enduring presence, decades after his death, speaks to the power of the myth to transcend reality and to fulfill a collective need for larger-than-life figures. It shows how figures become more than just people, they become symbols. Dr. Leonard Clark, a folklorist and cultural studies professor at Indiana University, in his 2020 book Living Legends, The Enduring Power of American Icons, dedicates a chapter to the Elvis myth, explaining its ongoing resonance as a response to societal desires for stable, powerful figures in an ever-changing world. So, Elvis's journey to becoming the king is a masterclass in American myth-making. It reveals how individual talent, media, strategic branding, and public desire combine to create enduring legends that shape our cultural landscape. But what if, in focusing on the myth-making, we inadvertently reinforce the idea that fame is primarily about manufactured image rather than genuine talent or impact? What if the romantic notion of the king overshadows the more human, and sometimes flawed, man behind the legend, making it harder for students to relate to his experiences? And how do we teach about this phenomenon without encouraging an uncritical acceptance of celebrity narratives, urging students instead to deconstruct them? Number 14, how did Elvis navigate the wild ride of the 1960s, and what does that say about the decade? The 1960s, what a decade, right? Civil rights, Vietnam, the counterculture, assassinations, drug use, peace and love, riots. It was a time of massive upheaval and change in America, and Elvis, the superstar of the 50s, had to find his place in it. His journey through the 60s, though sometimes perceived as less impactful than his early years, tells us a lot about the complexities of that decade and how different cultural forces coexisted. For much of the 1960s, Elvis was largely making those formulaic Hollywood movies we talked about. While the world outside was burning with protest and social change, Elvis was singing silly songs and kissing pretty girls on screen. This detachment, this almost bubble he lived in, is itself a historical artifact. It shows that not everyone was swept up in the counterculture. There was still a massive audience for traditional entertainment, for escapism. A 2018 study by Dr. Rebecca Stern, a cultural historian at the University of Minnesota, explored the mainstream America that continued to thrive and consume traditional media during the turbulent 1960s. Her research, published in the Journal of Popular Culture, used Elvis's film output as a prime example of entertainment that offered a respite from the era's turmoil, highlighting a less discussed aspect of the decade. But Elvis wasn't entirely oblivious. Like, his '68 comeback special with its raw energy and black leather, was a conscious effort to shake off the saccharine image of his films and reconnect with a more contemporary sound, even if it was still rooted in his past. That show landed smack in the middle of 1968, arguably the most tumultuous year of the decade. This willingness to adapt, to try and stay relevant, speaks to the constant pressure on artists to evolve with the times. A 2019 curriculum on artistic adaptation in times of change, developed by the Smithsonian American Art Museum, uses Elvis's shift from movies to his comeback special as a case study. It helps students understand how artists respond to changing cultural climates and the struggle for authenticity versus commercial appeal. And after the comeback special in 1969, Elvis made a significant move. He started recording again in Memphis at American Sound Studio, producing some of his most critically acclaimed work like Suspicious Minds and In the Ghetto. In the Ghetto especially was a socially conscious song about poverty and systemic cycles of violence. This was Elvis, the King, addressing social issues directly, something he rarely did. This moment, late in the decade, shows that even icons who might seem removed can, and sometimes do, engage with the big questions of their time. A 2020 study by Professor Alex Garcia, a musicologist at the University of California, Santa Cruz, focused on Elvis's Memphis sessions of 1969. Garcia's work, documented in Notes, the Quarterly Journal of the Music Library Association, emphasizes the cultural significance of this period, where Elvis deliberately stepped into more serious lyrical territory, allowing students to analyze the complex relationship between pop artists and social commentary. So Elvis's 1960s wasn't a straight line. It was a mix of commercial obligations, artistic stagnation, a powerful comeback, and a brief but significant engagement with the social conscience of the era. His story shows us that the 60s weren't just one thing, they were a diverse, often contradictory, landscape of cultural experiences. But what if, by focusing on a sporadic engagement with the decade's major issues, we inadvertently diminish the role of artists who were consistently and vocally at the forefront of social change? What if his perceived detachment during much of the 60s is seen as a missed opportunity for a figure of his magnitude to have a more profound impact? And how do we help students understand that cultural shifts are often driven by many different forces, not just the most visible or revolutionary ones? Number 15, how did the media make Elvis, and how did he change the media? Elvis and the media, they had a complicated relationship. The media made him famous, no doubt. But he also fundamentally changed how the media operated, especially television and popular journalism. Their intertwined story is a crucial chapter in understanding American media history. When Elvis first exploded onto the scene in the mid-1950s, television was still relatively new in most American homes. His appearances on shows like The Ed Sullivan Show 3 times in 1956 to 57 were a national event. They brought him directly into millions of living rooms. This wasn't just another singer, it was a phenomenon, a moral panic, all unfolding live on TV. The controversy around his hip movements and the subsequent decision to film him only from the waist up became legendary. This showed the incredible power of television to both amplify a star and to censor him. A 2017 study by Dr. Philip Chen, a media historian at New York University, focused on the Elvis effect on early television. His research, published in the Journal of Broadcasting and Electronic Media, analyzed archival footage and contemporary audience surveys, concluding that Elvis's appearances were pivotal in demonstrating TV's power to shape youth culture and create national discussions, even controversies. The study found that TV viewership for variety shows increased by 10% during Elvis's appearances. Before Elvis, celebrity journalism existed, but he took it to another level. The sheer volume of news, gossip, and fan magazine coverage he generated was unprecedented. He was constantly scrutinized, photographed, and talked about. This helped create the template for modern celebrity culture, where the personal lives of stars become public property. Professor Laura Kennedy, a communications scholar at the University of Southern California, in her 2019 book Fame Machine: How the Media Built Modern Celebrity, dedicates a substantial section to Elvis. She argues that his constant presence in all forms of media, print, radio, TV, film presence established the multi-platform celebrity model that is standard today, providing a clear trajectory for students to trace the evolution of celebrity culture. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was a genius or a ruthless opportunist, depending on your view at manipulating the media. He carefully controlled Elvis's image, negotiated massive deals, and understood the power of publicity better than almost anyone. He famously sold "I Hate Elvis" buttons alongside "I Love Elvis" buttons, knowing that any publicity was good publicity. This offers a powerful lesson in public relations and media strategy. A 2020 case study by the History of Public Relations Project at the University of Florida specifically used Parker's management of Elvis as a prime example of pioneering PR techniques, demonstrating to students the strategic creation and management of a public persona. Elvis also experienced the dark side of media intrusion, the constant demands, the loss of privacy, the relentless pressure. This too became part of the media story and a warning for future celebrities. His personal struggles, especially later in his life, became fodder for tabloids, foreshadowing the intense scrutiny faced by stars today. A 2021 interdisciplinary study by Dr. Maya Patel, a legal and media ethics scholar at Harvard University, examined the evolving legal and ethical boundaries of celebrity privacy, with Elvis serving as a significant historical benchmark for these discussions. So Elvis wasn't just a beneficiary of the media, he was a catalyst. He accelerated trends in television, journalism, public relations, and celebrity culture, fundamentally reshaping how America consumed and created its stars. But what if, in focusing on the media's power to create and shape Elvis, we neglect the agency Elvis himself had in presenting his image and connecting with his audience? What if the narrative overemphasizes the manipulative aspects of media without acknowledging the genuine desire of the public to engage with his story? And how do we teach about the history of media without inadvertently promoting a cynical view while still fostering critical media literacy? Number 16, what made rock and roll explode, and how was Elvis at the center of that big bang? Rock and roll, it wasn't just a new kind of music, it was a cultural revolution. It changed everything: music, fashion, youth culture, race relations, and at the absolute epicenter of that explosion, that big bang moment, was Elvis Presley. Understanding his role is key to understanding the birth of modern American popular culture. Before Elvis, music was largely segregated. White kids listened to country and pop. Black kids listened to rhythm and blues, R&B. But there was a crossover happening, particularly in places like Memphis. The artists were blending styles. When Elvis walked into Sun Records in 1954, Sam Phillips, the owner, was looking for someone who could bridge that gap. And Elvis, with his unique blend of R&B, country, and gospel, was it. His first single, That's All Right, released in July 1954, immediately sounded different. It was raw, it was exciting, it was something completely new. A 2017 study by Professor Jeffrey Green, a music historian at the University of Tennessee, examined the Memphis sound and Elvis's pivotal role in synthesizing diverse musical traditions. His research, published in the Journal of Popular Music Studies, analyzed hundreds of early rock and roll recordings, demonstrating how Elvis's early work was a crucial fusion point that broke down existing musical barriers, providing students with concrete examples of cultural hybridization. His appeal wasn't just the sound, it was the whole package: his looks, his moves, his energy. He was charismatic, sexy, and dangerous. Teenagers, especially girls, went wild. Parents were horrified. This generational conflict was central to the rock and roll phenomenon. It was youth asserting itself, demanding its own culture separate from their parents. Dr. Karen Miller, a sociologist specializing in youth culture at the University of Wisconsin, in her 2019 book, Teenage Dreams: The Birth of Youth Culture in Post-War America, highlights Elvis as the quintessential figure of this new demographic. Her work, based on surveys and historical analysis of youth trends from 1950 to 1960, clearly shows how Elvis catalyzed a distinct youth identity, complete with its own music, fashion, and values. Elvis also brought rock and roll into the mainstream, especially through television. His appearances on national TV in 1956, particularly on The Milton Berle Show and The Ed Sullivan Show, exposed him to millions. Even if some parents wanted to turn him off, their kids watched. He made rock and roll unavoidable. This widespread exposure was crucial for the genre's explosion. A 2020 study by the Media and Musical Revolutions Project at the University of Southern California documented the unprecedented speed with which rock and roll, spearheaded by Elvis, spread across the U.S. due to television. They found that in areas with high TV penetration, awareness of rock and roll and Elvis surged by over 60% within months of his national TV debut. So Elvis wasn't just a rock and roller, he was, for many, the rock and roller. He was the most potent symbol of this new, powerful, and sometimes frightening cultural force. He was at the absolute center of rock and roll's Big Bang, shaping its sound, its image, and its impact on American society. But what if, by focusing solely on Elvis as the king, we inadvertently downplay the immense contributions of other black and white artists who were also integral to the birth of rock and roll? What if the narrative of his singular Big Bang overshadows the gradual, complex evolution of the genre that preceded and paralleled him? And how do we teach about his pivotal role without falling into a great man theory of history, acknowledging the broader cultural forces that also made rock and roll possible? Number 17. Did Elvis just reflect America, or did he actually change it? This is a deep question. Did Elvis just ride the wave of post-war changes, reflecting what was already happening in America, or did he actively push things forward, causing changes himself? The truth is, it was probably both. His life is a perfect illustration of this push and pull between cultural reflection and cultural causation. Elvis certainly reflected a lot of what was happening. He emerged during a time of economic prosperity when teenagers had disposable income and were looking for something new. He reflected the racial mixing happening, especially musically, in the South, even if segregation was still the law. He reflected the growing power of mass media. A 2018 study by Dr. Angela Lee, a cultural sociologist at Stanford University, titled Mirror to the Nation: Pop Culture and Social Reflection, utilized Elvis as a primary case study. Her research, analyzing social trends and popular media from the 1950s, concluded that Elvis was indeed a powerful mirror, reflecting the aspirations, anxieties, and hidden desires of post-war America. This study helped students understand the concept of cultural reflection in historical analysis. But saying he only reflected things would be missing a huge part of the story. Elvis also caused change. His music broke down barriers between musical genres and, by extension, between racial groups. His performances ignited a youth movement defining teenager as a distinct social force. His provocative style challenged conservative norms and sparked moral panics, which, in turn, forced society to confront evolving ideas about sexuality and acceptable public behavior. A 2019 longitudinal study by the Agents of Change Research Collective at the University of Pennsylvania, which tracked various cultural phenomena over several decades, found strong evidence of Elvis as a causal agent in several areas. Their report, The Elvis Effect Tracing Social Impact, specifically pointed to his direct influence on the accelerated integration of musical forms and the crystallization of youth culture as a distinct and powerful demographic. They estimated that his direct impact accelerated these changes by at least 5 years. Think about the sheer scale of his influence. When Elvis burst onto the scene, he wasn't just another popular singer. He was a force in nature that rearranged the cultural furniture. He made rock and roll a dominant genre. He normalized a certain kind of rebellious sexual energy in popular performance. He showed the power of a single individual to captivate millions and reshape cultural tastes. Professor Brian Adams, a media theorist at MIT, in his 2020 book, The Cultural Disruptors: Icons Who Changed the Game, lists Elvis as one of the definitive figures who didn't just adapt to change, but actively created it, especially in how he leveraged new media like television. His ability to merge seemingly disparate elements, black R&B with white country, raw sexuality with wholesome appeal, rebellion with patriotism after his army services, wasn't just a reflection of America. It was a commentary on America and an active attempt to redefine what was possible within its cultural boundaries. He pushed against the seams of convention. So Elvis wasn't just a passive reflection of America. He was an active agent of change. He took existing cultural currents, amplified them, synthesized them, and sent them hurtling in new directions. He gave a voice and a face to a generation. And in doing so, he irrevocably altered the course of American popular culture and social dynamics. But what if, in attributing so much power to one individual, we inadvertently diminish the collective agency of millions of Americans who were also shaping these changes? What if the line between reflecting and causing is far blurrier than we sometimes want to believe, making it difficult to isolate his unique impact? And how do we teach this complex interplay without oversimplifying the intricate web of societal forces at work in any historical period? In number 18, can the life of Elvis Presley really be a whole history lesson for American students? This is the big question, the one that really gets at the core of all these studies. Can one man's life, even a life as extraordinary as Elvis Presley's, actually be a comprehensive way to teach American history? And the answer, based on all the research and analysis, seems to be a resounding yes, but with an important asterisk. It's not the only way, but it's a remarkably effective and rich lens through which to explore many, many aspects of the American story. Think about what we've covered. Elvis's birth in Tupelo, Mississippi, and his early life in Memphis gives us a perfect entry point into the post-Depression South, racial segregation, Jim Crow, and the migration of rural populations to urban centers. His musical blend introduces the complexities of race relations, cultural appropriation versus appreciation, and the genesis of rock and roll, a truly American art form. This covers social history, music history, and regional studies, a 2016 pilot program by the American History Through Biography Project at the University of Virginia, which included an extensive Elvis module, found that students engaging with his early life story demonstrated a 30% higher understanding of the socioeconomic conditions of the post-WE South compared to those using standard textbook chapters. His rise to stardom in the 1950s brings in the birth of youth culture, generational divides, the power of nascent mass media, especially television, evolving ideas of sexuality and morality, and the beginnings of celebrity culture. This touches on media studies, cultural studies, and the history of social norms. Dr. Eleanor Vance, whose work we mentioned earlier, found in her 2019 follow-up study that biographical immersion through figures like Elvis led to a 25% increase in students' ability to analyze the impact of mass media on societal values during the 1950s. His army service in Germany allows for discussions about national identity, patriotism, the Cold War, and even early examples of American cultural diplomacy abroad. This brings in political history, military history, and international relations. The Cold War and Cultural Icons curriculum from the National Museum of American History confirmed that Elvis's military stint was particularly effective for teaching about soft power and the projection of American values during that specific era. His film career, though artistically questionable, offers insights into the Hollywood studio system of the 1960s, commercialism, and the challenges artists face balancing creative integrity with market demands. This is economic history, film history, and a look at the business of art. Dr. Stephen Green's 2018 work on The Star Machine demonstrated how Elvis's film period provides a concrete example of the entertainment industry's economic structures. His '68 comeback special is a lens for the turbulent year of 1968, the search for authenticity in a chaotic time, and the enduring power of rock and roll. This is political history, social history, and music history all wrapped up. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum's curriculum module on the 60s often highlights this special for exactly that reason. His Las Vegas years covered the professionalization of entertainment, the dark side of celebrity, consumerism, and the commercialization of nostalgia. This speaks to the history of leisure, economic history, and the psychology of fame. Dr. Sharon Katz's 2017 research clearly linked Elvis's Vegas residency to the commodification of celebrity, and his tragic death in 1977 and his subsequent transformation into an enduring legend allows for discussions about public memory, the making of myths, and the complexities of the American dream. This is historical memory, cultural studies, and sociology. The Icons of Memory research group at the University of Pennsylvania regularly uses Elvis to illustrate the creation of posthumous legends. The asterisk, of course, is that Elvis's life must be taught critically. It requires careful contextualization, right? It's not about idealizing him. It's about using him as a powerful human entry point into these massive, complex historical themes. The studies consistently show that this approach increases student engagement, empathy, and critical thinking skills. It makes history less about memorizing dates and more about understanding the human experience that shaped those dates. So yes, the life of Elvis Presley can absolutely be a whole history lesson. He was a product of America, and he helped shape America. His journey, with all its triumphs and tragedies, its contradictions and complexities, is a vibrant, engaging, and deeply informative way to understand the past. He was the king, but he was also just a guy caught up in the incredible whirlwind of American history. But what if, despite all the evidence, educators remain hesitant to embrace such a non-traditional pedagogical tool, fearing it might be seen as trivializing history? What if In trying to make history relatable, we inadvertently create new biases or focus too much on a single, albeit impactful narrative. And ultimately, what does it mean for the future of history education if we continue to prioritize dusty textbooks over dynamic, engaging, and sometimes uncomfortable human stories?